Montana Territory, 1878. The rolling plains bowed beneath the weight of a crimson sunset as Preston Morgan urged his horse toward the Circle M Ranch. At 24, Preston had already carved his place in the Montana wilderness, a respectable spread of 300 acres, a small herd of cattle, and a cabin he'd built with his own hands. But for all his frontier success, he remained a solitary figure against the vast landscape. "A man's got no business dreaming of anything but survival out here," he muttered to his horse as they crested the final hill. The words had become a mantra, a shield against the emptiness that sometimes threatened to swallow him whole when night fell across the plains. Preston's face, handsome with its strong jawline and light stubble that he kept neatly trimmed, rarely revealed the loneliness that had taken root inside him. His eyes, the color of summer grass, surveyed the horizon with the watchfulness of someone who'd learned early that the frontier gave nothing freely. At over 6 feet tall with broad shoulders from years of ranch work, he cut an impressive figure, but he kept to himself in the nearby town of Silver Creek, polite but distant. The letter had arrived 3 months ago, carried by the monthly mail rider. Preston had answered an advertisement in an eastern newspaper, young women seeking correspondence with respectable gentlemen of the Western Territories, more out of curiosity than hope. Now, as he dismounted and led his horse to the small stable beside his cabin, he thought of the stack of letters tied with string in his dresser drawer. Letters from Ruby Grayson, a 21-year-old schoolteacher from Boston with chestnut hair and, according to her delicate handwriting, eyes the color of autumn leaves. "Foolishness," he said aloud as he unsaddled his horse. "The West breaks gentle souls." His parents had learned that lesson the hard way. His mother dead from fever their first winter, his father from a Sioux arrow 2 years later. Preston had survived by believing a simple truth: connection was a luxury the frontier didn't permit. But Ruby's letters spoke of something different, a world where people shared more than just the brutal work of survival. Her last letter lay folded in his shirt pocket, having arrived just yesterday with a daguerreotype that showed a young woman with a gentle smile and eyes that seemed to hold both kindness and determination. For the first time in years, Preston found himself wondering if his certainty about frontier solitude might be wrong. 2 weeks later, Preston stood awkwardly on the Silver Creek train platform, hat in hand, watching the Eastern Pacific pull into the station with a screech of metal and billowing steam. His heart hammered against his ribs. The last month had been a flurry of preparations: expanding his cabin, adding a proper bedroom with a door for privacy, purchasing fabric in town for curtains. All for a woman he knew only through words on paper. The train doors opened, and passengers began to descend. Preston scanned each face, remembering Ruby's description of herself. "I stand 5 feet 4 inches tall, with chestnut hair I typically wear pinned up, though it falls well past my shoulders when loose. I will be wearing a blue traveling dress and carrying a leather valise." And then she appeared, stepping carefully onto the platform, glancing around with evident trepidation. She was even lovelier than her daguerreotype had suggested, her blue dress emphasizing the warmth of her complexion. At 21, Ruby Grayson looked both younger and somehow older than Preston had imagined, youthful in her features, but with an air of quiet determination that spoke of character beyond her years. Their eyes met across the platform. Preston felt rooted to the spot, suddenly aware of his rough hands and the dust on his boots. He'd been a fool to think this refined Eastern woman could possibly. Ruby smiled, and something in Preston's carefully constructed worldview began to crack. "Mr. Morgan?" She approached, her voice softer than he'd imagined, but steady. "Miss Grayson." He managed a slight bow. "Welcome to Silver Creek. Thank you for meeting me. I confess I'm rather overwhelmed." Her gaze took in the dusty main street beyond the station, the distant mountains. "It's more beautiful than I imagined, and yet more wild," Preston supplied, taking her valise. "The West doesn't much care for pretense, Miss Grayson. It's honest in its harshness. Please, call me Ruby." She adjusted her hat against the bright sun. "And I didn't come for pretense, Mr. Morgan. I came because your letters spoke of a life that, while difficult, has meaning, purpose." Her eyes met his directly. "I've had quite enough of Boston parlors where meaning is in short supply." Preston felt something unexpected stir within him. Respect, perhaps, or the dangerous beginning of hope. The arrangement, he began awkwardly. Yes, 3 months, Ruby finished for him. Time for us both to determine if a more permanent arrangement would be suitable. Her cheeks colored slightly. I'm not naive about the challenges, Mr. Morgan. I understand we're essentially strangers. Preston, he corrected. If we're to live under the same roof, even temporarily. Preston, she repeated, and he was surprised by how much he liked the sound of his name on her lips. As he helped Ruby into his wagon for the journey to the ranch, Preston couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. The frontier had taught him that change usually meant danger, but for the first time in years, he found himself wondering if it might mean something else entirely. The first weeks passed in a blur of awkward adjustments and tentative discoveries. Ruby proved surprisingly resilient, rising early, learning to cook on a wood stove, adapting to the stark simplicity of ranch life. Preston found himself both impressed by her determination and unsettled by her presence. His once quiet cabin now carried the scent of lavender soap and the sound of humming as Ruby worked. Why did you really come west? Preston asked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the prairie in gold and purple. A schoolteacher from Boston could have found a husband there easily enough. Ruby was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing the edge of her teacup. My father died last year. He was a professor, classics and philosophy. My mother followed him 3 months later. She looked toward the horizon. They left me comfortable enough financially, but the life waiting for me there felt. She searched for the word. Predetermined. Every dinner party, every conversation, every expectation. I wanted something real, even if it was difficult. The West is real enough, Preston said grimly. Sometimes too real. Your letters were different from the others, Ruby admitted. You didn't paint some romantic picture. You wrote about hard work and solitude and beauty that had to be earned. It felt honest. She looked at him directly. Why did you write to me in the first place? You've built this life alone. Why change that? Preston couldn't meet her gaze. Sometimes the silence gets too loud, he finally said, the most honest answer he could give. Their tentative peace was shattered 3 days later when Preston rode in with a bullet wound in his shoulder, his shirt soaked with blood. Ruby's hands shook as she helped him inside, but her voice remained steady as she instructed him to lie on the table. Cattle rustlers, Preston managed through gritted teeth. They've been hitting ranches up and down the valley. Ruby cut away his shirt with kitchen shears. I assisted our town doctor occasionally, she explained, examining the wound. The bullet went clean through. You're fortunate. Didn't feel fortunate when it happened, Preston muttered, then hissed as she began cleaning the wound with whiskey. Hold still, Ruby commanded. All traces of the hesitant Easterner gone. I need to stop the bleeding. Preston watched her face as she worked, focused, determined, completely present. No hysterics, no fainting. Just calm, methodical care. Something shifted in his assessment of her. You're not what I expected, he admitted, lightheaded from pain and blood loss. Ruby's hands paused briefly. Neither are you. She resumed her work. Now be quiet and let me concentrate. That night, feverish and weak, Preston drifted in and out of consciousness. Each time he opened his eyes, Ruby was there, changing compresses on his forehead, offering water, checking his bandages. In his delirium, he found himself confessing things he'd never meant to share. My father died right where you're sitting, he murmured. Arrow in his chest. I was 15. Ruby's cool hand touched his forehead. I'm so sorry, Preston. Taught me the frontier doesn't forgive weakness. Can't afford to care too much about anything. Is that why you live alone? Her voice was soft in the lamplight. Because caring is dangerous? Caring gets you killed out here, he mumbled before slipping back into darkness. When the fever broke 2 days later, Preston remembered little of his ramblings, but something had changed between them. Ruby moved around him with new confidence, and he found himself watching her with growing curiosity. The woman who had arrived from Boston in her blue dress was evolving before his eyes, taking on the resilience of the frontier while maintaining something essentially herself. As Preston recovered, spring arrived in earnest across the Montana plains. Ruby took to riding alongside him as he checked fence lines and cattle, her initially awkward seat in the saddle improving daily. She wore a divided riding skirt she'd sewn herself and had taken to braiding her chestnut hair into a practical plait that hung down her back. Mr. Jenkins at the general store asked about our wedding date, Ruby mentioned casually one afternoon as they rode. He seemed quite confused when I explained our arrangement. Preston adjusted his hat against the sun. Small towns run on gossip. Our situation isn't exactly common. No, Ruby agreed. Though I've noticed several ranchers' wives giving me assessing looks in town. Mrs. Peterson actually cornered me to ask if I found Montana suitable. And do you? Preston asked, surprised by how much the answer mattered to him. Ruby considered the expanse of wildflowers stretching before them, purple and gold against the green grass. It's harder than I imagined. Lonelier. Her eyes met his, but also more beautiful, more honest. The 3 months will be up in 4 weeks, Preston said, the words feeling like stones in his mouth. Yes. Ruby looked away. I suppose we'll need to discuss expectations soon. Before Preston could respond, gunshots echoed from the direction of their cabin. Without hesitation, he spurred his horse forward, calling for Ruby to stay behind. To his frustration, she urged her mount alongside his. I'm not hiding while you ride into danger, she shouted over the thundering hooves. They crested the hill to find 3 men ransacking the cabin. Preston drew his rifle from its scabbard. Stay here, he ordered Ruby. If shooting starts, ride for town. For once, she didn't argue, though her knuckles were white on the reins. Preston approached cautiously, rifle raised. That's far enough, gentlemen. You're on private property. The men turned, rough-looking characters with the hard eyes of men who lived outside the law. The leader spat tobacco juice onto the dirt. Well, if it ain't Morgan. Thought you'd be dead after Harkins put that bullet in you. His gaze slid to Ruby on the hillside. Didn't know you had company. Pretty company at that. Preston's finger tightened on the trigger. Take what you've already stolen and ride out. This doesn't need to get messy. The leader laughed. 3 against 1 seems plenty messy for you, Morgan. What happened next unfolded in a blur. The rustlers drew their weapons, and gunfire erupted. Preston dove for cover behind the water trough, returning fire. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Ruby urging her horse down the hill, not toward town as he'd instructed, but circling wide around the cabin. A bullet splintered wood inches from Preston's head. He fired back, hitting one of the men in the leg. The injured rustler fell, cursing. The remaining 2 split up, trying to flank Preston's position. Suddenly, a rifle shot cracked from the side of the barn. The leader jerked backward, clutching his shoulder. Preston looked to see Ruby standing in the barn doorway, his spare rifle in her hands, expression determined. Next one won't be a warning, she called, her voice remarkably steady. The moment's distraction was enough. Preston surged forward, disarming the wounded leader while keeping his gun trained on the 3rd man. Drop it, he ordered. With their leader bleeding and their advantage lost, the rustlers surrendered. Preston bound their hands while Ruby kept them covered with the rifle. Where did you learn to shoot like that? Preston asked later, after the sheriff had taken the rustlers away. Ruby was sweeping broken glass from the cabin floor, her hands finally showing the trembling they'd held at bay during the crisis. My father believed women should know how to defend themselves. He taught me and my mother both. She paused. I've never shot at a person before. Preston crossed to her, gently taking the broom from her hands. You saved my life today. You would have done the same. She looked up at him, vulnerability and strength mingled in her expression. That's what partners do, isn't it? Protect each other. The word partners hung between them, carrying weight beyond their temporary arrangement. Preston reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. For a moment, they stood frozen in the golden afternoon light streaming through the windows. Then Ruby stepped back, her cheeks flushed. I should finish cleaning up. That night, unable to sleep, Preston stood on the porch watching stars blanket the vast Montana sky. The day's events had shaken loose something he'd been fighting since Ruby's arrival. The recognition that his carefully constructed solitude was crumbling, and worse, that he didn't want to rebuild its walls. Couldn't sleep either? Ruby's voice came softly as she joined him, wrapped in a shawl against the night chill. Too much thinking, he admitted. About the rustlers? About you. The words emerged before he could reconsider them. About how everything I thought I knew feels different now. Ruby was quiet for a long moment. When I came west, I thought I was seeking adventure. Something different from Boston drawing rooms. She looked up at the immense canopy of stars. But I think I was really looking for a place where I could matter, where what I did would have consequence. You matter here, Preston said, the words rough with emotion. What happened today proved that. Ruby turned to him, her face silvered by starlight. I've been keeping count, 26 days until our agreement ends. And then, Preston's heart hammered against his ribs. And then I either return east or... She left the alternative unspoken. Preston took her hand, his calloused fingers engulfing her smaller ones. Stay? Not because of our arrangement. Not because of convenience. Stay because, he faltered, decades of guarding his heart making the words almost impossible to speak. Because, Ruby prompted gently. Because I've been wrong, he finally said. All these years, I believed the frontier taught that caring was weakness. That connection was a liability. But watching you these past months, your courage, your resilience, your kindness, I've realized the frontier's real lesson might be the opposite. He drew a deep breath. We survive out here not by walling ourselves off, but by finding someone worth facing the hardship with. Ruby's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Are you certain? A few months ago, I was just a schoolteacher from Boston who'd never even cooked on a wood stove. And now you're the woman who saved my life and made me remember what living is actually for. Preston stepped closer. I'm not offering an arrangement anymore, Ruby. I'm offering partnership. A life built together. Ruby's answer came not in words, but in the step she took toward him, closing the distance between them. Their first kiss was tentative, then deepened with the certainty of coming home after a long journey. The following weeks brought rapid change to the Circle M Ranch. Word of Ruby's courage during the Rustler incident spread through Silver Creek, transforming the curious whispers about Morgan's mail-order bride into stories of frontier partnership. Women who had eyed Ruby with suspicion now sought her friendship and advice, impressed by a woman who could manage both a rifle and maintain Eastern refinement. Preston found himself unexpectedly at the center of community attention as well. Men who had previously known him only as the solitary rancher now clapped him on the back in the saloon, offering congratulations and, occasionally, good-natured ribbing about being tamed by an Eastern filly. They're calling us the letter lovers in town, Ruby informed him with amusement one evening as they sat by the fire. Apparently, our story has traveled as far as Helena. Mrs. Peterson says a newspaper reporter may come calling. Preston groaned. All this fuss over two people finding each other. It's not just that, Ruby said thoughtfully. It's that we found each other across such distance, not just of miles, but of worlds. People love stories that suggest connections can form despite unlikely circumstances. She smiled at him. It gives them hope. Hope. The word resonated with Preston in a way it never had before. The Rustler's attack had revealed not just Ruby's courage, but something fundamental about his own transformation. The instinct that had flooded him when he saw the men near his cabin wasn't just the protective response of a man defending his property. It was the fierce determination of a man protecting someone he loved. As their wedding day approached, a simple ceremony planned at the small Silver Creek church, Preston found himself increasingly haunted by one final secret. Something he hadn't shared with Ruby, something that might change everything. The revelation came 3 days before the wedding, triggered by the arrival of a telegram for Ruby. Preston brought it from town, watching with growing unease as she read the yellow paper, her expression shifting from curiosity to shock. What is it? He asked, setting down the supplies he'd purchased. Ruby looked up, her eyes troubled. It's from James Harkins. Preston froze. Harkins, the name the Rustler had mentioned. The man who had shot him. What does he want with you? He claims. Ruby's voice faltered. He claims you killed his brother 4 years ago in a land dispute. That you're not the man I think you are. She held out the telegram. He says he has proof you shot Theodore Harkins in the back over water rights. Preston felt the ground shift beneath him. The past he'd tried to outrun had finally caught up. Ruby, is it true? Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled. Did you kill this man's brother? Yes. The word fell between them like a stone, but not the way he describes. Outside, the Montana sunset painted the world in fire and gold, oblivious to the human drama unfolding within the cabin walls. Preston sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. Theodore Harkins was rustling cattle and poisoning water holes to drive small ranchers off their land. When I confronted him, he drew first. Preston's voice was hollow with memory. The shot that killed him hit him in the side, not the back. There were witnesses. The sheriff ruled it self-defense. Then why would his brother claim otherwise? Ruby remained standing, arms crossed protectively over her chest. Because James Harkins has been trying to avenge his brother ever since. He's the one behind the rustling, the one who shot me. He wants the territory to believe I'm a murderer. Preston looked up at her, raw honesty in his gaze. I should have told you before. About all of it. But I was afraid. Afraid of what I'd think. Hurt edged her voice. Afraid you'd see what I've been trying to forget. That violence follows me. That loving me comes with danger. The truth he'd been running from spilled out. My parents died because of this land. I've killed a man defending it. When I saw you on that train platform, so refined, so full of hope, I thought maybe I could start fresh. Be the man you thought I was from my letters. Ruby was silent for a long moment. The telegram crumpled in her fist. 3 days before our wedding, I discover you've been keeping something this significant from me. Her voice broke slightly. How can I trust anything now? Preston stood, reaching for her, but she stepped back. Ruby, please, I need time. She turned toward the door. I'm going to stay in town tonight. With Mrs. Peterson. I need to think. As the door closed behind her, Preston felt the foundations of his new life crumbling. The frontier had taught him yet another brutal lesson, that the past never truly released its grip, that happiness could be snatched away in an instant. That night, as rain lashed against the cabin windows, Preston faced his darkest fear, that Ruby would leave, returning east to the safety of Boston drawing rooms and civilized society. That in losing her, he would lose not just a partner but the better self he had discovered through loving her. Dawn found him still awake, staring at the ceiling, when pounding at the door jolted him upright. He opened it to find Sheriff Taylor, grim-faced in the gray morning light. Harkins made his move, the sheriff said without preamble. Took Miss Grayson from the Peterson place at gunpoint about an hour ago. Said he's going to extract justice for his brother. Cold fear gripped Preston's heart. Where? Left a message he'd be waiting at Widow's Peak. Preston was already moving, pulling on boots, checking his rifle. He wants me, not her. That's what I figure. But Morgan, the sheriff's hand landed on his shoulder. Harkins has 3 men with him. He's not looking for a fair fight. He's looking to kill you and make that poor woman watch. Then he'll be disappointed. Preston's voice held the steel of absolute resolve. Gather some men. Follow my trail. But I'm not waiting. The ride to Widow's Peak pushed Preston's horse to its limits. The rocky promontory overlooked the valley, offering a commanding view and nowhere to approach unseen. As he drew closer, Preston slowed, dismounting to continue on foot through the pine forest that flanked the peak's base. Above, he could make out figures on the plateau, Ruby, hands bound, seated on a rock, Harkins pacing nearby, 3 men stationed at various points, rifles ready. The setup was designed to catch anyone approaching from the main trail. But Preston knew these mountains intimately. There was another way up, a treacherous climb up the backside that few knew existed. As a boy, he'd discovered the hidden path while hunting. Now, it offered his only chance. The climb was brutal, loose rocks sliding beneath his boots, the rifle slung across his back, threatening his balance with each step. By the time he reached a position just below the summit, sweat soaked his shirt despite the cool morning air. From his vantage point, Preston could hear voices carried on the wind. Your fiancé's taking his time, Miss Grayson. Harkin's voice was mocking. Maybe he doesn't care for you as much as you thought. Or maybe he's smarter than you give him credit for. Ruby's response held defiance rather than fear. Smart won't save him. Nothing will. My brother's blood demands payment. Preston inched closer to the edge, peering over. Ruby sat straight back despite her bonds, her chestnut hair windblown around her face. Even in danger, she maintained the quiet dignity that had first drawn him to her letters. Timing would be everything. Preston had one advantage, surprise, and he would need to make it count against 4 armed men. Drawing his rifle, he took careful aim at the man stationed furthest from Ruby, then squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked across the plateau. The man fell, and chaos erupted. Harkins yanked Ruby to her feet, using her as a shield while the remaining 2 men scrambled for cover, firing wildly toward Preston's position. Morgan, Harkins shouted. Show yourself, or the girl dies next. Preston moved quickly along the ridge, firing twice more to keep the men pinned down. One shot found its mark, another man down. But now his position was exposed, bullets splintering rock inches from his head. "I'm the one you want." "Harkins," Preston called. "Let her go, and I'll come out." "So you can put a bullet in me like you did my brother?" "I don't think so." Harkins backed toward the edge of the plateau, dragging Ruby with him. "Throw out your rifle. Come out with your hands up." Preston hesitated, calculating angles, possibilities. Ruby's eyes found his across the distance, and something passed between them. Understanding, trust, resolve. In one fluid motion, Ruby drove her elbow hard into Harkins' stomach, then dropped to the ground as he doubled over. Preston fired in the same instant, his bullet striking Harkins in the shoulder. The remaining henchman, seeing the tide turn, threw down his weapon. Preston rushed to Ruby, cutting her bonds with his knife. "Are you hurt?" "No." She touched his face with trembling fingers. "You came for me. I will always come for you." He helped her to her feet as Sheriff Taylor and his posse finally arrived, taking control of Harkins and his surviving man. "It's over," the sheriff told them. "Harkins will hang for kidnapping, if nothing else. You two won't have to worry about him again." As they rode double on Preston's horse down from Widow's Peak, Ruby's arms wrapped around his waist, Preston felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Not just the immediate danger, but the burden of his past. "I thought you might have gone back east," he admitted as they descended into the valley. "After what I told you. After the telegram." Ruby rested her cheek against his back. "I considered it. For about 5 minutes." Her arms tightened around him. "But then I realized something important." "What's that?" "That the man in your letters, the one who spoke honestly about the harshness of the frontier but also its beauty, who admitted to loneliness but never self-pity, that man was real. More real than the simplified version of yourself you thought I wanted." Preston reined in the horse, turning to look at her. "I should have trusted you with the whole truth from the beginning." "Yes, you should have." Ruby's expression was solemn. "No more secrets, Preston. Not between us. The frontier may be harsh, but we face it together, all of it." "No more secrets," he agreed, then smiled slightly. "Though I do have one more confession." Ruby raised an eyebrow. "I've loved you since your 3rd letter," Preston said softly. "The one where you described teaching your students about constellations on the Boston Common, how you told them stories about each star. That's when I started falling for you too," Ruby admitted. "When you wrote about the wildflowers that bloom after prairie fires, how beauty follows devastation if you're patient enough to wait for it." Their wedding 3 days later became a territorial celebration. Ranchers and townspeople from across the valley gathered at the Silver Creek Church, which overflowed with wildflowers gathered by the local children. Ruby wore a simple white dress with prairie lilies in her hair, while Preston stood tall in a new suit purchased specially for the occasion. As they exchanged vows, Preston looked into Ruby's amber eyes and saw not just the refined Boston schoolteacher who had arrived by train, nor just the frontier woman who had stood against rustlers with a rifle. He saw his partner in all things, the woman whose courage had taught him that vulnerability wasn't weakness but the foundation of true strength. "I promise to face whatever comes with you," he vowed, his voice steady with certainty. "To build our life together on honesty, respect, and love that's stronger than any frontier hardship." Ruby's smile illuminated her entire face as she responded with her own promise. "I will stand beside you through every season, in abundance and in scarcity, in peace and in danger. Your home is my home, your struggles my struggles, your joys my joys." The reception that followed at the town hall became the stuff of local legend, a celebration that united the entire community. The territorial governor, visiting from Helena, raised a toast to the couple whose remarkable story reminds us that the true pioneer spirit isn't just about taming the land, but about finding connection despite the wilderness. A reporter from the Helena newspaper cornered them briefly, eager for details about the letter lovers, as they had become known throughout the territory. "What would you say to other young women considering following your path west, Mrs. Morgan?" the reporter asked. Ruby considered the question carefully. "I would say that the frontier strips away pretense. It reveals what truly matters: courage, loyalty, love. If you come west seeking those things, you may find hardship, but you'll also find your truest self." 2 years later, Preston stood on the porch of their expanded ranch house, watching Ruby in the garden with their infant daughter, Eleanor. The Circle M had prospered. The cattle herd tripled in size. A new barn rising where the old one had stood, fruit trees beginning to bear in the orchard Ruby had insisted on planting. Letter from the governor, he called, holding up the envelope that had arrived with the mail rider. Says our story has inspired a dozen new correspondence courtships in the territory. Apparently, we're responsible for a population boom. Ruby laughed, adjusting Eleanor on her hip as she came to join him. We can't take credit for Montana's growth. The governor disagrees. Says the letter lovers of Silver Creek have become something of a legend. Preston wrapped an arm around her shoulders, marveling at how perfectly she fit against him. Though I think the legend improves with each retelling. Did you know that according to Mrs. Peterson, you single-handedly fought off 12 rustlers? And according to Mr. Jenkins, you scaled a sheer cliff under gunfire to rescue me from Harkins. Ruby's eyes danced with amusement. Perhaps we should correct these exaggerations? Preston looked out over their land, the fertile valley stretching toward distant mountains, cattle grazing peacefully in lush pastures, wildflowers nodding in the summer breeze. Then down at their daughter, with Ruby's chestnut hair and his green eyes, the perfect embodiment of their union. Let them tell their stories, he said softly. The truth is better anyway, that a lonely rancher and a Boston schoolteacher found each other across a continent. That love can grow from ink on paper to something strong enough to weather any storm the frontier sends. Ruby stood on tiptoe to kiss him, Eleanor gurgling happily between them. Our real story is just beginning, she whispered against his lips. And as the Montana sunset painted the sky in gold and crimson, Preston knew with absolute certainty that his long-held belief had been wrong. The frontier wasn't a place where connection was impossible. It was where connection mattered most. Where love wasn't a luxury, but a necessity as vital as water or shelter. Where two souls could find in each other not just survival, but a life worth the hardship of building it together.